So this is my talk about the Karabakh War, Nagorno-Karabakh War of 2020. I gave this talk probably 30 or 40 times already, but I assume none of you have heard it before. And this is primarily a talk about about the war, but also about the implications for the science and technology. I'm a technologist by trade, so this is part of this presentation. It is based strictly on open sources. It has been approved for public release, distribution unlimited. Anything I say here is my personal opinion and does not reflect the views of the United States Army, or the employer, or any other agency of the United States government. Based primarily on open sources of Russian language. I am a native Russian speaker, and both Armenia and Azerbaijan, the parties to this war, as well as an important player there, Russia, all use Russian in a large extent in their public sources. So, before we go to the Karabakh War of 2020, let's take a look at a very important historical analogy. That is Russo-Japanese War, which I believe and many others believe was the first true war of the 20th century. Now, to remind you, the Russo-Japanese War occurred from February 1904 to September 1915, primarily in Manchuria and Korea. It was a fairly large war involving anywhere about 700, 800, 600,000 troops on each side at any given time. And it was characterized by one major new military technological phenomenon. One major new military technological phenomenon, which was the massive and effective use of machine guns. Of course, machine guns were known decades before. Of course, they had been used on occasion for decades. This was the first war in which this was a massive and effective use of that particular technology. The war was widely observed and reported in voluminous reports were written and published on both sides. There were representatives of all major nations from Europe, military officers, observers on both Japanese side and Russian side, Latin American countries, United States. They were all represented there. They all wrote reports, and interestingly enough, they had relatively limited conclusions, mostly influenced by ethnocentric views, and they were saying that European and American militaries have little to learn from this peculiar Asiatic war. Those peculiar Asiatics, they find funny. So again, if somebody would just look at that massive and effective use of machine guns and squint really hard, they would have seen the battlefields of World War I. They would have seen, for example, that there will be even greater use of machine guns, even more influential use of machine guns. They would have seen the demise of unprotected direct fire, demise of horse cavalry. They would see the need for something like tank. They would see the need for something like anti-tank weapon. All this could have been seen in the field of Manchuria. Somebody would think hard and squint hard, thinking. This war was a canary in the mine, but they didn't listen, told one colonel of the United States Army told me recently. So let's not make the same mistake, and let's take a look at the more recent history, and that is the Karabakh War, the first true war, I say, of the 21st century. First true war of the century. It only took 6 weeks, from September 27 to November 10 or 9 of 2020. It occurred in Nagorno-Karabakh mountains. The number of troops were about 150K on the Azerbaijan side, and about 50 to 70,000 personnel on Armenia's side. By the way, numbers are starting to be adjusted. Perhaps there was a little fewer Azeri forces and probably more Armenian personnel. So this were relatively comparable number of armed combatants. By the way, these are huge numbers in proportion to population. Think about this way. Armenia is about more than 100 times less smaller than the United States. So to bring it to the scale of the United States, multiply everything by 100. Multiply 170K of troops of Armenia by 100. We are talking about 7 million troops. Can you imagine the United States within 2-3 weeks bringing to the area of operation 7 million troops? Unthinkable. So this was a huge, huge number. The numbers of killed in action were about 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, depending on source, on Azeri and Armenian side. Thinking about multiply this, let's say 4,000 Armenian casualties by 100. 400,000 casualties on the scale of the United States in a 6-week war. This was a hyper-lethal, hyperactive war, just like the US Army doctor now foresees will be occurring if we have to fight a period of it. Now, what about the major new military technological phenomena? Yes, there was one as well. That was the bulk of lethality. The bulk of lethality in this war was administered, affected by unmanned systems. Never before in the history of human mankind that happened. Never before in the history of human. Bulk of lethality was by unmanned systems. Other significant observations. So Armenian armor, artillery, and logistics were massively defeated by Azerbaijan unmanned systems. Another interesting observation, which by the way resonates with some of the things we're observing in the more recent conflict. By the way, I'm not allowed to talk about the Ukraine war. That's a policy of the United States Army. I'm not allowed. So I will be occasionally referring to more recent conflict. It is a major role of Azeri infantry infiltration tactic. Infantry infiltration tactic, which essentially was the final blow that Azeris delivered to the Armenians. Literally infiltrating through mountains, very difficult terrain, extensively using cover and concealment offered by the mountains. Significant use of long-range fires, assisted partly by the unmanned systems. Very few direct fire armor engagements, unlike in some movies. Very few direct fire armor engagements. Almost no use of conventional air assets, either rotor or fixed wing, even though both parties had significant arsenals of air assets. Armenian air defense, even modern, turned to be ineffective against Azeri unmanned systems, not unlike in more modern conflicts, more recent conflicts. Similarly, EW was ineffective against unmanned systems, and so on. Very low civilian casualties. Neither of the sides claimed any significant civilian casualties. Even those civilian deaths that did occur, did not occur due to unmanned systems, occurred to conventional rocket artillery. So let me remind you how the conflict unfolded. This is the geographic area. This is a complicated geographic area. We have these three small countries: Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, surrounded by the huge neighbors. Russia, which is was a formal military ally of Armenia. Armenia is formally allied militarily with Russia. Azerbaijan, which has very, very close relations with Turkey. Georgia that tried to stay neutral, and Iran, which tends to be more friendly to Armenia than to Azerbaijan, even though because the large Azeri populations is also a large fraction of the Iranian population, and both countries are Shia Muslims. So since 1990s, a part of Azerbaijan called Nagorno Karabakh in Russian, Karabakh and Azeri in Armenian, was controlled by the unrecognized Republic of Artsakh. which was an ethnic Armenian, largely Armenian enclave supported by Armenia. It's about 100 kilometers east to west, 150 kilometers south to north. This kind of a trapezoidal area right over here. For all practical purposes, that part of Armenia was occupied by, that part of Azerbaijan was occupied by Armenia. I am entirely neutral in this conflict. So please excuse me if there is any appearance that I am favoring any of the sides. The yellow line is a very internationally recognized border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The dashed yellow line is actual control line that was established in the 1990s between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And the red line here is a main supply route leading from Armenia proper through Shushy and to Stepanakert, the capital. On September 27, Azeri forces attacked all along the perimeter, all along the line of control, except the one that is here. This is Iran, ARL River was right here, and this is ARL River Valley. All these are very rugged mountains, except for the ARL River Valley right here. The Azeri forces attacked all along the perimeter on September 27, and by October, they were able to break through deeply echelon defenses in the ARL River right here, which was the only part of Nagorno Karabakh which was suitable for armored warfare. This was the area where there was the only examples of armored fire warfare, and that's where the Azeris did experience some losses of armor. By October 14, the Azeri forces went further into the ARL Valley and then attacked north and took an important town of Badrut, which is a kind of a gateway into the entire Nagorno Karabakh. Thereby, they secured their northern flank. They continued then to move in October from 15 to 20, move further to some other important towns within ARL River Valley, and then attempted a run up this valley of this river here, and in an attempt to cut the main supply route of Armenians. That they were unable to do. They were partly defeated by Armenians, and partly warned by Russians that they shouldn't come anywhere close to the international border, or Russia will be forced to intervene. Azeris certainly didn't want Russia to intervene, and so they backed down. And at that point, what Azeris did was something highly unusual, very interesting, and very sophisticated and successful. They infiltrated a substantial number of ground troops, infiltrated through the mountains, literally crawling through the bushes and through the ravines and so on in the mountains, and used this light infantry attack against the key town important town of Nagorno Karabakh called Shushy. Once Shushy was taken, the main supply route was cut, and Armenians had no choice but to agree to essentially surrender. Bulk of Nagorno Karabakh was surrendered to Azeris, with in some central areas under control of Russia. For all practical purposes, Armenia gave up. It totally defeated. One of the very few examples of truly decisive war in last 200 years. Relatively decisive war are uncommon, very rapid, even more uncommon. So what was the reason for this massive and decisive victory of Azeris? Nobody predicted that victory. There's not a single analyst, show me if I'm wrong, that ever predicted that Azeris will defeat Armenians. Everybody said Armenians are armed to the teeth, they prepared massive defenses, they have high morale, they are well prepared, they're reasonably well trained, they will mobilize as much forces as needed, Azeris will not be able to defeat them. Nobody expected this victory. And look at the correlation of forces. The Azeris did not exceed, the personnel didn't exceed more than maybe 1 to 1.5. In prepared defenses, in mountains, no chance, zero chances. Take any correlation of forces table in any book, and it will say they had no chance. Yet it was absolute decisive, fast and decisive victory. What happened? So as I said, the major new phenomenon was use of unmanned systems. The majority of Armenian losses were to unmanned systems. I'm talking about assets, real assets, less so personnel, but even personnel to some extent. Well. Tanks, 272As and T-72Bs, approximately 170 are estimated to be destroyed by unmanned systems. 170. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's multiply by 100, as I suggested, right, to bring it to the United States scale. 170 times 100. 17,000 tanks at the scale of the United States. 17,000 tanks destroyed in 6 weeks. Can you imagine that? Has it ever happened? Mind-blowing, right? By unmanned systems. By the way, that also tells you something about how well armed Armenians. They were extremely well armed. Huge amount of tanks, huge number of artillery, much more armed, better armed, per million of population than the United States. Same story with all kind of armored vehicles, stout artillery, self-propelled guns, SAMs, radars, transportation vehicles, enormous quantities, enormous quantities. Again, multiply everything by 100 to get a sense of scale. Major command posts, major ammunition dumps, and in the second half of the last 3 weeks, the unmanned system was starting to hunt even small groups of dismounts. Heavy losses of dismount personnel as well through unmanned systems. This is a very typical picture. Here is the ground or something like that, and is being destroyed by the unmanned system. So, what are those unmanned systems? What were they? So, in my estimate, about 80% of targets were destroyed by a system called Bayraktar TB2. I suppose I don't need to explain this again what Bayraktar TB2 is. It's armed with two MAM-shell laser-guided bombs. Total payload about 150 kilograms, including 55 kilogram bombs to about 25, 27 kilogram bombs. It's about relatively slow, intentionally slow, 220 kilometers per hour maximum speed, 150 kilometer communication range, 27 hours endurance. I'd say a very long endurance device, and about 5.5 kilometer operating altitude. About 20% were destroyed by HAAC loitering munitions. That's an Israeli loitering munition. This 23 kilogram tandem worker, usually tandem, not always tandem. Much past the 400 kilometers per hour maximum. The same 200 kilometers comms range. That's typical comms range for any direct line of sight comms. 9 hours endurance. 1,000 kilometers range. 1,000. It was not needed in this war, but it does have 1,000 kilometers range. And about 4.5 kilometers operating altitude. Also used were spike and lost missiles. These are not really loitering munitions, but they were used approximately like loitering munitions. Spike and loss is also Israeli system. It's a very substantial missile, 70 kilogram total, with 25 kilometer range. Orbiter 1K is an Israeli design produced under license in Azerbaijan. 2 kilogram warhead. It's used both as a small loitering munition as well as an observation drone with 2 hours endurance. And Orbiter 3 was also partly bought from Israel, partly produced under license from Israel in Azerbaijan. It's about 150 kilometer range, strictly observation and laser pointing asset. Here's a typical Armenian tank. This revenue is here, and here is a second later after the laser guided bomb from Bayraktar TB2 kills it. So, what does this war of Karabakh 2020 tell us about the future? Imagine we are in the role of those observers in the field of Manchuria. We need to squint hard and see what all this means for the future. Let's first of all not ascribe this to peculiar Asiatic war. Unfortunately, there is a tendency to say, well, this is a peculiar war between two small nations in a weird situation. I don't think so. This is a view of the future. This is the first true war of the 21st century, and it tells us a lot about how the wars will be fought in the 21st century. By the way, in 2017, I wrote a report published 2018. It happens to be publicly released, and it's available on internet by myself, Kott, Alexander Kott, Ground Warfare of 2050, How It Might Look, where I described a warfare that looked very much like that. My only regret is that I ascribed it to the year of 2050, not 2020. We clearly are witnessing the dawn of intelligent munitions, intelligent artificial combatants, intelligent artificial combatants. These are intelligent artillery rounds, intelligent missiles, and intelligent loitering munitions, and so on and so on. All of them are already acquiring sensors, onboard intelligence, means of maneuvering, and so on, and will do so more, much more in the next 10 years. They have, of course, growing degree of autonomy. They already more and more autonomous in terms of they don't require remote piloting. They probably will be smaller in sizes than what we see now. Why smaller in sizes? It's harder to notice, harder to keep, easier to hide, and so on. And they will probably, because they will be smaller in sizes, they will operate in kind of a wolf packs. I don't like term swarm. I don't believe that's the right term. They probably will be kind of ground hugging, nap of the earth flying, and between the trees, kind of between the rocks, between the trees flying missions. They probably will have some ground capabilities. At least they will be able to perch, land, perch, wait, fly again. And you will see thousands of these kind of entities in a hyperactive battle, which means they will require some kind of a automated command and control, near autonomous AI support. By the way, pictures here, it's very interesting. That's an Armenian T-72 tanks. A fraction of a second before it's going to be hit by probably most likely by the Karabakh munition. And this is another tank which was hit by Karabakh munition. You can see the engine of Karabakh sticking out of the hole. This is that's the same engine on an actual Karabakh. What else can we be told? Can we infer from this war? We probably will see growth of importance in short-range point defenses, active protection system of various types, CRAM, and so on, because otherwise it will be very difficult for substantially sized assets to survive in modern war against these loitering munitions or Bayraktar type weapons. We will see growth of the use of intelligent deliverable decoys against such munitions. Digging in will be very important. Tunnels are going to be growing in importance. So Elon Musk will sell his boring company. Dismounts in small distributed teams in high cover and concealment areas will grow in importance. We certainly see this in some of the more recent conflicts. And highly distributed command and control with short hop self-organizing networks will be growing in importance. And here's the picture of Armenian soldiers, probably after some bio break, going back to their vehicle, this covered truck. And this is a second later after ammunition right here. And you can see what happens to those dismounts. That was happening all over Nagorno Karabakh throughout those, especially the last 3 years. So this was a watershed historic event in military technology. Once in a while, such watershed events occur, and everybody says, oh, wow, that is a very important technology, and they run, and they try to acquire it. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II took Constantinople primarily with large number of large cannons. Cannons were not a new technology by that time. Everybody had some cannons. This was the first time they were used in large quantities and highly effective. And everybody said, oh, cannons. And the entire, every European country ran and tried to get as many cannons as possible after the event of 1453. That was a watershed event in history of military technology. In 1403, at the Battle of Cerignola in Italy, where Spanish fought French, the handheld firearms, the early arquebuses, were used at a large scale, in large numbers, and defeated in Spanish, outnumbered Spaniards defeated larger and very well equipped otherwise, other than firearms, French forces. And everybody after that started to rearm with firearms, which were a kind of novelty still at that time. And Battle of Königgrätz, 1866 in modern Czechia. The first massive use of cartridge breech loader rifles by Prussian, also known as Dreisegun or needle gun. And of course, that initiated an era of breech loading cartridge-based rifles, which lasts. You've seen Mosin Nagant rifles, even in some more recent. Machine gun, we already talked about Russo-Japanese War, 1904. That was the watershed event. Battle of Cambrai in 1917, tanks, a watershed event in history of military technology. And Karabakh War of 2020 was a watershed event for unmanned missions.